Nation of BC. I am currently coming to you from Tsimshian territory in Prince Rupert, feeling really blessed and grateful to be with you all this morning with our incredible panel. We're blessed to have scientific advisor Val Morrison from the National Collaborating Center for Healthy Public Policy to facilitate and oversee our progress today. Val's been working with us on a variety of things: wicked problems, complex adaptive systems, healthy policy. The list goes on, but in this discourse on well-being society, it's particularly important that we look at the policy levers and the perspectives and lenses that can shape a better future for us all. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Val, who will introduce our facilitator, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm joining you from just north of Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal, in Quebec, on the traditional lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. And I am forever grateful for the hospitality to live, work, and play on these lands. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's Wellbeing Society webinar. And we're honored to have with us Sandra Martin-Harris. Sandra brings deep experience in Indigenous-led approaches grounded in relational ways of knowing and land-based learning. And we're also very pleased to share that Sandra has recently been appointed as PHABC's new Elder in Residence. So we're grateful for the wisdom and guidance that she brings to this important role and to today's webinar. Her work reminds us that well-being is rooted in connection to land, to culture, and to one another. And we are grateful that she's with us to guide us through this important conversation. So please join me in warmly welcoming Sandra.
Masai, thank you, Val, for that warm welcome and the kind words. Saiso Nira Uzi, Sandra Martin-Harris, Saiso Tsakase Weesdes. Witsolen Etsen, Hegelget Etwestai. I'm calling in from the Gitxsan territories here in Northwest British Columbia. I'm a grateful guest living in my mom's grandmother's community of Hegelget First Nation. And it's a beautiful morning. It's a little bit cloudy. We got some snow after some cold and then rain and then snow. We've got some crazy weather happening. But we can see the beautiful Stekjoden Mountain this morning. So thank you for joining us in this wonderful panel this morning, this amazing series, Wellbeing series, and this particular webinar this morning with some absolutely wonderful women, First Nations women. And so I'm pleased to introduce the panelists this morning. We have Dr. Nicole Redvers. Dr. Redvers is a member of the, I'm going to say this wrong, my apologies, Danièle First Nation and Northwest Territories, a beautiful, beautiful place. She's a past clinician and global leader in Indigenous planetary health. She serves as an associate professor and director of Indigenous planetary health at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western University, and is vice president of research for the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada. So pleased to get to know Nicole. I've read her work for years and had the pleasure of meeting her overseas of all places. And so inspired to meet her and learn more of her work. So good morning to Nicole. And I'll move on to welcoming Danièle Behn-Smith. Dr. Behn-Smith is Métis from the Red River Valley and H.O. Dene from Fort Nelson First Nation. She has the honor and privilege of working in BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer, Indigenous Health. She works alongside Dr. Bonnie Henry and other team members at the BC Office of the Provincial Health Office to uphold the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, unlearn and undo systemic white supremacy and racism, and advance true reconciliation. And unfortunately, Dr. Shannon Waters is on a different time zone, so she's not able to join us. We recognize her for her longstanding work and support here at PHABC as well. So I'll ask Nicole or Danièle to say a few words before we jump into the questions. Dr. Nicole?
Sorry, I'm going to ask Danièle to start. My dog just started barking of all the
Okay.
times. He's been quiet the whole day. So just give me 30 seconds. I'll turn it over.
Okay. All right.
Like that impeccable timing for sure. Um, Tanche Kiwau, Selotsia Nezu Nekandeta, Danièle Behn Smith Dishnakashan, Sezitla Azezon, and Michifnia Pishten Michif. Fort Nelson First Nation, Gotse at E, Pi Winnipeg Dostjin, Anush Lekwangin Tanach Niwikin, Pi Niminiquan di Lo de Tsauk Nation, Nimieten e Nakasketek. So good morning, everybody. Just introducing myself again and really grateful that I can use a teeny tiny bit of Slavey and a little bit of Southern French Michif. So I was just telling you that I come from Fort Nelson First Nation. I told you that my Slavey name is Azezon, which means crying all the time. I live on Lekwungen Tanach here in what's colonially referred to as Victoria. And my tea that I'm drinking is made with water that comes from Tsauk Nation. I'm cisgendered and straight. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a mama to 2 kiddos, and I have been very grateful to work in public health for the last 10 years as my main focus. But as I was reflecting on coming here today and the focus of the conversation around Indigenous-led approaches, relational ways of knowing, and land-based learning, I realized that that has been a focus for me for many decades now. Shortly coming out of my Western medical training, I had some experiences that really helped open my eyes and ground me in that way. And so that's the orientation that I've carried through my journey in medicine, which is how I ended up in public health, guys, because after all of this, I realized that the thing that's going to allow us to unleash the sacred wisdom that's held in our lands and waters and by our more than human relatives can only really be fully understood and appreciated once we've done the tough work of eradicating white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism from our settler colonial structures and systems. And I believe we can do it. I think we can handle it, even though it's hard, heavy heart work. And yeah, thank you, Sandra, for acknowledging our dear colleague, Dr. Shannon Waters, who's Hulk Aminum. She lives up on her own traditional territory at Huatletnitz, and she's unfortunately unable to join us, just due to a bit of confusion with the time zones. But I told her I'd do my best to channel her brilliance, because I kind of know some of the things that she'll often say. And I'm so grateful to her as a teacher. She's been so generous. And the Coast Salish peoples, generally, this is territory that I've occupied now for, I guess, 14 years. My kiddo is 14, my eldest one. So I've had a tremendous, the tremendous privilege of being shaped by some of the teachings and laws of these places. So I'll do my best to share that with respect and and care. And I feel like there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, but it's totally just escaped my perimenopausal brain. So, Nicole, I'll pass it to you. Oh, I did want to acknowledge too that I have known Nicole sort of for so many decades. I think we've maybe met in person 1 or 2 times, but Nicole is like a rock star to me. And we kind of met through a functional medicine channel again many moons ago. So I'm just really grateful to share a space with her and with Sandra and Shannon. So thank you so much for having me this morning, Masi.
Mhm.
Messy Cho, thanks for that, Danièle, and thanks for stepping in. I've had a skunk issue, which, to our elders is always good medicine when skunks decide to visit your property, but it's taken up residence under my shed, and my dog has had some unfortunate interactions. So it was the skunk people showing up, they put this fancy little door so that the skunk could get out and not get back in again. So they were here trying to get the skunk door to check and make sure the little fella's left so far. So good timing, of course, on that. But Atlanatea, really happy to be here as noted, my name's Nicole Redvers. I'm a member of the Danièle First Nation up in Treaty 8 territory, otherwise known as Dene or Land of the People, otherwise known as the Northwest Territories, and was born and raised both in my home community, and then my parents decided to move us a couple hours west to Katladetchi and West Point First Nation territory, because back then they didn't have school going above a certain grade in those small communities. So instead of shipping us off, they decided to just move us to the next big city town of 3,000 so that we could attend school in the same area as our parents. Given, of course, some of the histories of shipping students out there, it was a little bit of a sensitivity around there. So I spent most of my time in what's referred to as the south area, I guess, of Tucho or Tunede, Great Slave Lake, and really had the privilege and honor to be able to spend a lot of time on the land. My parents and my grandparents were very much land-based people, and it's been a tough years, I think, the last 5 years, because our area has been very much affected by the wildfires as well as floods over the last few summer seasons, which I'm sure folks are not unattuned to. I'm sure many of you, particularly in Northern BC and other places, have also faced some of these ongoing issues. So it's definitely a little harder to go home now when some of the usual sites of berry picking and all the rest of them are no longer there. So we just pray and hope that some of those sites will rejuvenate, and this is a new cycle starting in a different way. But currently right now I'm calling in from the traditional homelands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Lenape, and Shawneetown peoples here in southwestern Ontario as a visitor from the north on these beautiful lands. And I noticed today that I woke up and the sun came out, and it's the first time I've seen the cardinals come back in my yard. So a little couple, a little guy and a little woman who were around foraging. So that was just a nice time of year to see, where the weather's changing and the birds are starting to come back here. While at the same time, my dad's messaging me that it's minus 39 up in Hay River right now. So definitely a difference in the weather patterns. So most of my work has been in the area of Indigenous health, but in the last probably 10 years or so, have really focused more on the national and international levels, particularly around this concept of planetary health, mostly as a result and a response of having increasing frustrations in clinical practice when I was practicing for 10 years up north on the majority of our issues being very difficult to solve from the clinical exam room, but also the increasing environmental pressures. And it was clear that our voices were not being heard at important tables where decisions were being made. And that led me to where I am today. So really honored to sit with amazing and powerful women on this panel. And also sending good thoughts to Shannon, who wasn't able to make it, and looking forward to the conversation. So Masi Cho, and pass it back over to you, Sandra.
Yes, thank you, Masai, for that. And Wet'suwet'en language is an Athabascan language, so we're Dene people too. So we have connections all across Western Canada, Northern Canada. So that's so amazing to see and hear the language and hear the similarities, and which connects us all. Language is such a powerful way to connect to place. And so thank you both, Danièle and Nicole, for your warm words and introduction. And just want to hold up the good work that you're doing that we need to see in these spaces and many different spaces. But this idea of well-being, I've been listening to the webinar series, and thank you for hosting these webinars. They're so important to have a different understanding of our economy that works and cares for all people. And this idea of well-being from a First Nations perspective might have a little bit different understanding or elements, but I think there is some similarities too. So I'd like to start with you, Nicole, and about this idea of well-being. When you hear the term, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. It's I think about these words a lot, because words are words, but in many of our languages, they carry stories and narratives that make them seem much more complex than, a word of well-being. And for me, I try to think of the underlying feeling behind these concepts and words, because I think sometimes we intellectualize the concepts that we're faced with every day. And in some ways it's easier to do because we see them as at face value, try to define them and interpret them in the context of what is applicable within health systems and other places, comparatively to the sense of embodiment of the term and what that actually means on a heart level, what it means as a responsibility level, how it situates us within the world, not only in our relationship to ourselves, but in other people. So we actually had a interesting conversation last fall with a group of Indigenous folks from some different communities around the globe, because we were finding it increasingly difficult, particularly when working with the WHO, who has a very narrow different definition of what health and well-being is, very much catered towards your Western-centric mindset, and tried to envision or imagine, not to sort of completely throw the definition out the door and go with something different, but to try to maybe take one little step forward with the WHO and try to envision, what something could look like, both from a strategic standpoint as well as appreciating the wider nuance. And one of the things that kept coming up in those discussions around well-being was that the exclusion of the environment, the exclusion of our context, has very much been a purposeful component of how we've defined health and well-being historically and even currently today. And by forcing that exclusion of our environment and our surroundings from our health and well-being, it becomes very easy in terms of operationalization of our health systems to be human-centric, to be specifically catered to not have accountability and responsibility to the lands in which these systems situate themselves. So there's a strategy involved in that, and it makes it easier for health systems to not be accountable to the environment and where they're situated, comparatively to in our communities, where we see our traditional medicine systems very much embodying well-being as not only a well-being for ourselves, but accountability of the well-being to our surroundings and to our environment. And I remember an elder talking a number of years ago about one of our medicines up north, and she was saying that, this one medicine, if you overpick it, of course, it's not going to grow because you're not respecting that medicine. But if you don't pick it, it's also not going to grow because it needs the attention of the human relatives to be able to ensure that contact, that the energy is being given to this plant. So, it requires our engagement in that aspect of reciprocity, not only for our well-being, but also for the plant's well-being. So the responsibility is inherent within how that plant is present within our lives, but also reminds us when we're engaging with it that, there is that embedded reciprocity that's required. So well-being for me, therefore, then becomes an embodiment of exactly that. How do we be able to situate ourselves in a place where we're in a reciprocal exchange of good energy, of dynamic balance between the realms of health that we often know are important for our communities, the physical, the mental, emotional, the spiritual components, not as trying to achieve some solid balance, but a dynamic balance that interchanges, that adds complexity to it, that is adaptable, that is not static and evolves, according to our ecological surroundings and the people that we surround ourselves with, that have the ability to interact. Like one of my elders said, like a spider web, when you pull it and everything kind of comes with it, that these knots of interactions are very much, a part of this understanding. So it wasn't a simple answer to your question, Sandra, but my point being is that there's complexity involved. I don't think it can be situated at a word level, but has to be at a feeling level that embodies all of these understandings within it to truly get to a point where, ourselves and our communities are in that dynamic, balanced state where we can appreciate that there is some complexity to the situation and to how we see and situate our health and well-being in the world.
Thank you so much for that. I love the embodiment, heart-centered way, reciprocity, or responsibility is inherent in the complexity of that relationship in that relational way. So thank you for those words, Nicole, and we'll pick up on that in a minute. I'll move over to Danièle and ask the same question. When you think of this idea of well-being, what comes to mind?
Again, when I was just reflecting and anticipating, being excited to come and have this time with everyone this morning. I was actually thinking back on an experience that I had, it'd be 20 years ago now, and I don't always think of it that often, but this morning it was really vivid. So when I got out of my residency, which would be about 20 years ago now, I had this opportunity to participate in a documentary series where we traveled around the world and met with Indigenous healers and Indigenous plant medicine people for about a year. And I was fresh out of my Western biomedical training, and I was totally burnt out and actually ready to leave medicine altogether because I had come into medicine wanting to be a part of contributing to a solution to improving the health and well-being of my grandmothers, of other Kokums and Mamers and Etsus, across Turtle Island. And it was becoming clear that my toolkit in Western family medicine was not really contributing to that solution. So it was really actually quite a demoralizing, dispiriting time because I had gone in with a lot of enthusiasm, but that had been, kind of whittled away through just how straining and draining that training had been. So the Creator gifted me with this incredible experience of going and sitting at the feet of all kinds of brilliant, incredible people who shared so generously their knowledges with me. And so when you asked the question this morning, Sandra, I was thinking for me, one of the first clicks or expansions of that understanding was, oh yeah, health and well-being is not just the absence of disease. Right? That's so our focus is on pathology in Western conventional medicine. And because that's the limitation of our toolkit. So we kind of see things through that lens. So it was so incredible to me to receive these teachings. And we started filming in Fort Nelson with my dad and my grandparents, and we had some time in Winnipeg on those homelands. And then we traveled around. And what became so clear to me was that there are natural laws that govern all of us and govern this place, this beautiful planet. And not wanting to be pan-Indigenous because every place we visited had their unique, distinct languages, territories, medicines, just brilliant cosmologies. And there were some threads that went across all of those different places, including to some of the things that Nicole was just talking about. Balance was core to well-being, and balance, as Nicole just said, so complex, within yourself, between yourself and, your community, between yourself and your more than human relatives. That really was so core to well-being and went across mental, emotional, spiritual, physical realms. And that in addition to balance, it was about the way that you approached achieving the process of balance. And to me, it was so it was just such a sharp juxtaposition in terms of these core values and ways of knowing and beliefs that were just so deeply grounded in gratitude and humility, which were so sharply oppositional to the sort of hidden curriculum that comes through some of Western healthcare of, being a master, being an expert, being I'm trying to think of the right words, but it was just a very different orientation. And I guess also the thing that struck me was the idea that we are all connected, we are all one. And so my well-being depends on the well-being of the lands and waters that I'm connected to that sustain me, and also connected to the well-being of those around me. So it was that collective element to well-being that I think is not very well understood or accepted in a Western biomedical framework, which really aims to, understand things at this hyper individualistic level, including the, getting so not just in the individual, but an individual organ or set of tissues, right? So we have endocrinologists, cardiologists, pulmonologists, and that was the juxtaposition, I think, for me, understanding the teachings of my own territories, elders, and ancestors, but how those connected to those of other places, whether it was in Wales or on in Sri Lanka or on Quechua territories in Southern America, that there was that idea that it's, that we're all connected and it's about having this collective and individual balance. And I think maybe the last thing I'll say, just to be so explicit about it, is that there's tremendous gifts in Western biomedicine as well. And in that, deep, deep understanding of the tissues, of the genetics, of those different pieces. And it took me quite a long time to recover from the hurts of Western medical training to be able to have that same gratitude and humility and reverence for the knowledges that come out of that epistemology and ontology. But they need to be able to coexist, right? They kind of take up all the space in a room, all the space, and they kind of elbow other points of view and knowledges out of the way, which is that's, I think, the work that's before us, is how do we honor the gifts in all of those different understandings and knowings.
Thank you for that. There's so much there. I love the part around the natural laws that govern us, the remembering of that and feeling that, hey, and understanding what that means. And again, this idea of balance, dynamic balance, the core values of gratitude and humility. And I think you both came from that place of a place of humility and reflection and sharing. This teaching of that we're all connected, this thread that goes through many places and spaces. And the idea of collective and individual balance, and that's a tough one, with the human-centric approach that we often experience. Please, can you share more about that, Danièle, and then I'll go to Nicole.
Oh, sure, for sure. Where my mind goes, probably because it's the most recent, as I think of those COVID examples of here in what we call BC, during that period of time. I try not to go back there too much. It was, traumatic for everybody, but in this instance, it was so interesting to me to see that tension of epistemologies, like ways of knowing and being, just so clear for us, especially around interventions like community lockdowns. We didn't really use that language too much, but it was the, kind of common vernacular. We had many nations here who made the decision to limit access in and out of their communities. And from a Western public health ethic, this caused so much moral distress for many colleagues for whom in that orientation, overriding individual freedoms and liberties is a measure of absolute last resort. And so I had colleagues who were absolutely just so distressed, and what should we do? Like, this isn't right. It's not the right intervention. And we understood that tension as, oh, this is just a different belief system. Neither is right or wrong. They're just different. And for the nations and the leaders that are making these decisions, the teeny tiny number of elders that they have left in their communities who are fluent in their languages, who know the lands and waters, who know how to carry out the responsibilities that Nicole was talking about in a good way, the ceremonies, that those humans and protecting their health is so critically important, and and it's existential, right? Like, this is about cultural continuity. We're hanging on by a thread. It is so important that we, as a collective, value that way above my ability to go in and out to get this, that, or the other, thing. That's just a different way of being in the world, as opposed to sort of a blanket Western public health ethic of this libertarianism, this individual, my rights trump everybody else's rights and freedoms, or just that idea of having this complete individual autonomy and freedom, which for me, I guess, goes back to those natural laws, because I think so much of that actually is a fallacy. Like, none of us, we are all sustained by the lands and waters and abundance of this planet, and it's reciprocal. I loved Nicole's story that she shared about the elders. Like, those are earthly gifts that are there for us, but they come with these responsibilities and reciprocal obligations. So I can't even remember, Sandra, now what the prompt was for what I'm sharing. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. About the collective and the individual. So you spoke to it very well, so thank you. And I'll move over to Nicole to share your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. And perhaps because Danièle did such a great job of bringing in that community collective perspective, maybe I'll take it in a different direction to add on again that environmental ecological collective component, in addition, of course, to the the human level. And what I think about is, back a number of years ago, we published with a group of Indigenous elders and knowledge holders and land defenders this idea of the determinants of planetary health. And it really was a response to the social determinants of health narrative not being very inclusive of Mother Earth's needs. The way that environmental determinants of health were framed were all often from a deficit-based perspective of the environment being a place of harm, as opposed to the environment being a place of strength and health. And one of the key determinants that came out was human interconnectedness within nature, which speaks, of course, to the concepts that were talked about previously. But we pointed out very clearly that ecological demise, or the destruction of our environment, really points to an impaired human relationship with ourselves, because we are nature and not apart from it. But this loss of our ecologically bound cultural identity, which is a collective extension of our collectivity as humans, really, provides this disconnect from nature that manifests as this fragmented and associated identity that really allows us not to be able to recognize ourselves as part of a larger system. And when you can't recognize yourself as part of a larger system, it makes it much easier to be able to project predatory and abusive impulses onto the environment, even though it's our relative. So this ideology, or this viewpoint of independence, results in this sense of entitled ownership, this kind of perception of the natural world that really relates to it through transactional relationships that really do not have a sense of responsibility, care, or love. And of course, acknowledging that this worldview will only continue to perpetuate planetary harm, because we've excluded as a collective the environment as part of that relational aspect of our responsibilities. So yes, absolutely. And our collective nature stems again from those appreciation of those natural laws, or first laws, or original instructions. We call them Dene laws in my area. which informs our Indigenous knowledges, which are operationalized through traditional protocols or guidelines for how to walk in the world in a good way, that embodies that understanding of needing to take care of each other, needing to take care of the earth for not only our survival, but also for the survival of earth as part of our sustainability and accountability responsibility while we're here on the earth plane. So all of these dimensions are important. And I'm just seeing a beautiful cardinal just flying by. I was talking about them earlier this morning as well. They're such pretty birds. They shine so much against the backdrop of the snow. So I think, I think about that aspect of the collectivity point is bringing in the environment to that as well.
Thank you for that. And that really speaks to the Dene laws, the first instructions, the natural laws, that we're part of a larger system, and our language, our ceremonies, our songs, our crests, our totem poles, all of those things share this idea of relation to that larger something from the land, from that place, and how that speaks to sustainability, that we're not alone. I think Danièle mentioned, and maybe you did too, that we're not standing alone, we're part of something larger, and that we have that reverence for it, or that love and care, and we embody that wellness or that well-being from that place. Yeah, and so that's kind of like a spiritual connection, but it's also a laws piece, I think. Hey, it's a natural law, this idea of interdependence or interconnectedness, and the idea of reciprocity and responsibility flows from that. Yeah. And so, yeah, is there anything more there you want to say around that reciprocity?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking about that interconnectedness, because we say it quite often in our communities, and I find sometimes, particularly in other kinds of worldview settings, that the appreciation of what that actually means sometimes is really hard to bring into one's heart and spirit to a true depth, perhaps, of appreciation. And one of the examples, and some folks may have heard me say this, I've done, and I love asking kids this question is, where does the water come from when you turn on your tap? And they always come up with the funnest answers as a part of that. But what always surprises me when I ask that question to professionals or physicians or scientists or other academics, about maybe 20% of the room maybe puts up their hand. Sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's just a couple hands in the room of where that answer is. And then particularly with the medical students, asking them, of course, remembering what percent water are we in our body? And of course, depending on if you're born male or born female, 60, 70%. And then on average, how often do our cells turn over in our body? Because of course our bodies are not static. They're continually turning over in the system. So we're kind of renewed on a regular basis. And, there's differences, of course. Our gastric tracts maybe around 4 to 6 weeks of cellular turnover, where our bones, of course, a lot longer. But if we were to give about an average, maybe across the body of, say, 3 months. So every 3 months or so, our body is rejuvenating itself in some ways. So here I've been traveling quite a bit, unfortunately, but if I was to be here in this area, which is not my traditional homelands, the water, when I turn on the tap, is coming out of both Lake Erie and Lake Huron. So if I haven't been here for about 3 months, then I'm sitting here behind the screen as 60 to 70% Lake Huron and Lake Erie. And each of you are sitting behind your screens as 60 to 70% of the water bodies of where your water comes from. You are the rivers and lakes of your environments. That is what makes you at this moment. So that interconnectedness is not just a metaphorical or a symbolic, notion. It's a physiological reality in addition to that, which is important to understand as we think about that concept and the word. Those water molecules have been around for much longer than we have. And perhaps there's some water in me that was flying over the Amazon at some point in the sky. Perhaps one was in Lake Turkana. Perhaps one was in the bottom of the South Ocean. All of this wisdom over thousands and thousands and thousands of years built up in this that makes our bodies completely interconnected with all of those environments, and the teachings about us being star people are a reality, as many people know. Many of our minerals come from long lost unexploded stars. So our star stories of origin are often very connected to those understandings of interconnectedness. So I mentioned that because, this interconnected notion oftentimes sits at the metaphorical and the symbolic level. But the reality is that it sits in all realms. It sits in the spiritual realm, it sits in the mental realm, the emotional realm, and the physical realm as well. And appreciating that dynamic of importance really creates a little bit of a different dimension and a depth to appreciating how that concept is seen, I think, within our communities. That's it.
Thank you for
Sandra,
that.
can I jump in
Oh, sure.
to follow up with
Yes.
that? Because our friend Shannon Waters is not here, and what a tremendous, the creator does not make sense. Shannon Waters is like one of the fiercest defenders of water that I know, and just carries this, totally passionate love of water and maps and watersheds. I'm going to put in a shameless plug because I love her so much that she has written the most beautiful autobiography that weaves her story alongside the cycles of water. It's phenomenal. When it's available, we'll make sure that will shout it from the rooftops and the mountain peaks. So I really appreciate what Nicole was just sharing. And I think what I want to share, because sometimes I think this seems very complex, and maybe if you have been raised in settler colonial spaces and ways, it might seem even in some ways a bit unapproachable. So I just want to bring in my own humility here to say that when we were at the Canadian Public Health Association last April, which was held on Treaty 1 territory and Métis homelands in Winnipeg, one of the things that I clocked was that when people were doing their territorial acknowledgements, they were quite disciplined about acknowledging Shoal Lake as the source of the drinking water for what's now called Winnipeg. And I thought, oh man, that's really cool. And Shannon and I talked about it. And then I came back to Lekwungen and I was like, what am I doing to be a good guest here? Like, I'm not thinking about it in that sort of everyday way. And so that's why I've tried to become more disciplined about naming Tsauk Nation as the source of the majority of the drinking water that comes out of our taps here in what we call Victoria. And so even though this is such a complex and existential crisis that we face, and I'm trying to think of the words that you used, Nicole, and I loved it. Maybe Sandra has them in her notes, but just this idea that we're sort of in this conflicted relationship with ourselves. We've disassociated ourselves. That actually the first few steps of repair are so simple in that sense of just naming the lands and waters that we occupy and the lands and waters that nourish us today, and taking the time to learn more about the original inhabitants of those places if it's not on our own ancestral territories. And even then we're learning, right, about our own ways. And then taking those steps to stand shoulder to shoulder and in solidarity with the nations who hold the knowledges of that place, right? Like if we're all doing that in our individual or collective micro collectives, then together we're knitting it together and coalescing into that transformation on a larger scale. So I was just really thinking about that during this part of the conversation. And maybe if I can, Sandra, just share one story. This comes from, again, 20 years ago. towards the tail end of our filming, we were on Navajo territories. So we'd already been to many different places. And it was a really weird experience. I'm not a film star like our dear Dr. Evan Adams, so it was weird to have cameras with us all the time, but gradually got some familiarity with it. And we were sitting with a Navajo elder, Auntie Betty, and she spoke mostly Navajo. So we were doing a, translation from Navajo to English and back. And Auntie Betty was quite an incredible woman in her 80s, lived on her own, like hauled her own water, chopped her own wood, walked 5 miles a day, very kind of stoic lady. So when I sat down with her, I was like, oh, I really want to make sure that this is, a good use of her time. I don't want to waste her time. And so I was trying to think of good questions. And so the first question I chose was, Auntie Betty, like you chop your own wood, you walk 5 miles a day, you haul water, like in your 80s, like what is your secret or how do you stay healthy and well? And she gave this very short answer in Navajo, and her niece, who was translating, burst out laughing, like red cheeks. And this is all being filmed. So I'm like, oh, like, what's the funny answer? Like, I want to laugh too. And her niece is like, no, 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 let's just move on. And I was like, no, no, I'm here to learn. I don't want to miss out on it. Again, everything's being filmed. And so then her niece, Virginia's like, she said that's a stupid question. And I was like, ooh. So then I'm like starting to sweat because I'm like, oh, I'm doing this thing I didn't want to do. I don't want to waste this elder's precious time. And so I was like, I got to come up with a better question. So I was like, okay, I've got it. I've got it. And I was like, okay, so Auntie Betty, I've traveled to these different places and I'm starting to understand that ceremony is a really important part of health. Like, can you tell me more about ceremony and, why it's helps you stay healthy? Just like that, this same 2-word answer. And I was like, oh, I don't need the translation again. Like, this is now the only Navajo I know. Stupid question. And just like this totally stoic face. And so I'm kind of like, whoo. And then Auntie Betty just breaks out into this big smile. And I get the translation. And her niece is like, I haul water, I chop wood, I walk 5 miles a day. Like that is all ceremony. That is how I stay healthy. And for me, that was this total revelation because especially as somebody, so I was born in Fort Nelson, but I grew up in Winnipeg with my mom and my mom's family, raised like French Catholic. So I wasn't raised kind of alongside dentist ceremonies or land-based ceremonies. So as I traveled around, I got to participate in some of those like big C ceremonies. So I had an idea of what that was. And she really helped me in that like funny, teasing, ooh, ouch, embarrassing kind of way that it is all ceremonies. So we can get out of our heads, get out of our, our fear and apprehension and our fear of like doing the wrong thing and truly start by like, oh, this is ceremony, like Masi Cho, Marci, Tsauk, and this human or this more than human relative that that keeps me going. So thank you for your grace and indulging me with the sharing Auntie Betty's wisdom.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And that's our relational way as we come into that place to with gratitude and humility, understanding the water as a life giver. And we're so grateful for the life that water brings. And hopefully it's good, healthy water. We know many nations are fighting and trying to get good, healthy water in their homes and communities. So that interconnectedness is part of our laws, it's part of our way of being, our way of doing. And I think you both mentioned, the challenges of stepping into a human-centric society or systems. And I just think of the young people, and they're living in so many worlds right now, technology world. They may be disconnected from their culture and they're wanting to learn. I'm thinking about their well-being. How do we fold in, just like Auntie Betty folded you in her way as a young person, hey? How would you fold in youth, Nicole and Danièle, into this idea of the importance of this balance, dynamic balance, this understanding it's not human-centric? There's laws around us that help us know who we are, how to be. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to share there for our young people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was just thinking about this experience I had. I was invited to Wall Street a number of years ago, and I hummed and hawed about it for a while because not exactly a Wall Street person by any means, but they were wanting to have a conversation around some of the climate issues that were going on, and it was more of a curiosity for me. And they had invited, they have a few of those influencer youth climate activists that were going to be in attendance as well. And I remember sitting there in the big room of this fancy building, and one of the climate youth influencers was beside me, and I introduced myself and said hi, and she introduced herself, and I sat down beside her because we had to wait for a little bit. And the whole time she was there, she was on her phone bopping, and it's like, oh, the weather's nice today, and and yeah, and then sort of back on the phone. And I don't think I saw her look up the whole time. And I had this moment where I just thought, we have all these young people around the world that are clearly, in states of eco-fear and eco-anxiety about the situation in the world. But then I wondered, I wonder if they know what they're fighting for. Is it based on fear? Because, this existential threats that are very scary and very fearful for young people on what will happen. But that's a very different response to be fearful of a disruption to your status quo comparatively to action because you love your land, and the waters and the earth. And if you're coming from a place of fear and anxiety, how does that drive the kinds of solutions, and the kinds of actions that you engage with, participate, or the narratives that you decide to employ or advance comparatively to people in communities who are acting from places of love and sometimes grief, from the destruction that's happening, to our relative, and the kinds of responses, solutions, and narratives that get perpetuated from that different kind of mindset of your relationship to the lands around you. So it put me into a very reflective mode about thinking about youth, actually, in this standpoint, and how I'm noticing more and more this anxiety and fear-based response, comparatively to the, connection and land love connection that drives and has driven a lot of the responsibility coming from our communities, and what that means for engaging with youth, as a part of that process. That in many ways, that disconnection is still embodied, and I think we see as a result of that increasing amounts of anxiety and depression, of course, in our young people, not feeling like they have a foundational base for many complex reasons driven by the technologies and the kind of culture that we've put out for them today, and really starting to realize, with this renewed interest in Indigenous peoples and their knowledges, that seems to be exponential in the last 3 to 4 to 5 years, that I think people are grasping for straws on. There's no option, that people don't know what to do. We're at the stage of crisis where, they're looking to other things that seem to or may potentially have answers for these crises, which, has some truth to it. But at the same time, how do we think about youth from this human standpoint of fear and anxiety, and try to embody and bring connection to, similar to that water narrative that I shared before, the aspect of love land connection, so they do truly understand what they're fighting for. And I haven't had a good answer to that, but it was, I got asked a question by an Italian reporter about last year that sort of amplified this, and they kind of said to me, is eco anxiety a privilege? And I had to think about it for a sec, because, to be able to feel anxious about your current state, perhaps that means you have the time to be anxious around the state comparatively to being in, working 4 or 5 jobs or in a place where you're just trying to survive and put food on the table and water and all of those other things going on. We've seen this in some country contexts where it's very difficult to think about anything else other than survival. That piece of it. So it was all of these things kind of coming together around this youth mindset and where these things are and how to be able to support our youth and bringing them into these conversations is more and more important in my mind, because they are the beacons of hope. They do have this awareness about themselves, carrying some of the load of the weight of the consequences of today, while at the same time, I see it as our role as adults, as people, as responsible stewards of this earth, and trying to open arms and bring in these human interconnectedness understandings on a feeling level, through the stories and narratives and the values that we have, to be able to provide some grounding to a very currently distraught and imbalanced world. I think we've even seen more evidence of over the last week with what's been going on in many areas. And I do feel that we have that ability of regrounding and providing some root to this balloon that's trying to float away, and ensure that it stays tied to the ground, through love and kindness, and through opening and making sure that we bring in youth into these kinds of conversations.
Thank you for that, Nicole. I just think of your teaching of going to the land and remembering this part needs to be harvested and this can be left. And, we need to share that with our young people. And I'm sure that's happening, the intergenerational learning, to help fold them in through the land activities, the stories and the songs. And so beautiful to see that connection and to help them work through their grief, because I think there is a lot that love the land and understanding that there's a bigger grief they're connecting into, that collective piece. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. Danièle, did you want to share something there?
It's really making me think about a metaphor that we use in our unlearning and undoing work quite a bit to disentangle and make more clear the different buckets of work that need to be carried out in service to our lens is primarily, in service to true reconciliation and Indigenous health and wellness. But I think as we're having this conversation, what I know deep in my heart, what we're saying and saying it explicitly again, our health and wellness is the health and wellness of the lands, the waters of Mother Earth, right? So when we say Indigenous health or wellness, that's what we're talking about. And that applies to everybody. Like that, it really is, we're all one and all connected. So the metaphor that we use is we use a birch bark basket that comes from Treaty 8 territory from Fort Liard area that we use to represent our work as First Nations, Métis, Inuit to resist attempted genocide, to do intergenerational healing, to ensure cultural continuity, to keep those knowledges thriving, and to carry on our rights and responsibilities to exercise those. And that's very heavy, hard work. On the other side, we use a copper pot to represent or symbolize the work that settlers need to do in service to health and wellness and true reconciliation. And we use the copper pot because it comes from my friend, Dr. Kate Youngblood, who's a white occupier. It comes from her great opa's machine shop in Holland. So that's why we chose that as a symbol. And it is the work of unlearning, undoing, and eradicating systemic white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism, settler created problems that can only be solved by settlers. That is settler work. You need guidance from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, but the heavy lifting rests on the shoulders of settlers. And so when I think about this, such an important question, Sandra, about youth and the next generations of First Nations, Métis, Inuit on, this set of homelands that we now call Canada, but across the planet, they are the link. Like they are the link and such a critical part of getting through this human created crisis that we're facing. And to let them be unleashed and to do the work and to bring those solutions forward that are in their blood memories, that are those ancestral laws, natural laws. They really need those copper pot folks, those settler folks to be going full steam into the work of unlearning and undoing white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism, because I won't speak on behalf of Nicole, but I can speak on behalf of Shannon and I. Like, we've had to fight tooth and nail, and we've been standing on the shoulders of giants to be able to hold space and speak, who we are and what our ancestral ways of knowing are. And sometimes it's in a very receptive circle like this. Still today, it's, people dismiss it. Oh, like, really, water as a relative? Like, that is such a pervasive, dismissive comment. And that's what's going to keep us and keep our youth from being able to do that important work. And I'm saying our youth in a possessive way, and it's pretty pan-Indigenous. So, that will keep Indigenous youth alongside their copper pot buddies, right? Like, it has to be across all to just have that transformational resetting of relationships and repair of relationships. But it depends, I think, actually on the cohort of people in power today, which is of a certain generation, of a certain monochromatic skin tone, that keeps things entrenched. So I guess that's my call in, and thinking about the incredible words of Jody Wilson-Raybould, who says, like, we are not asking you to help heal us. We are asking you to fix yourselves. And that's what will create the space for those, ancestral knowledges of the laws to actually be carried out. And that is to the benefit of everybody. I have one other thought, if it's okay to share, because I think about, we do Unlearning Club at the office of the PHO. And a couple months ago, our focus was on land defense and enforcement and sort of that military response to land defense. And I thought, this is so interesting. Like, these are people, we are people standing on the places we've always stood, doing the things we've always done, and like standing there because of love and care. And all we're doing is just saying, hey, like, we are here to carry out our rights and responsibilities. Like, that's why our rights matters. It's connected to these responsibilities. It's not, we don't own things in that way. And to just get this violent response from settlers for us to just stand on our own territories. And we're doing that for everybody. Like, that's the really thing that really makes my head spin, because I think we're doing that because this watershed takes care of everybody here. It's not just about us. We're not trying to hold on to that benefit and say, oh, well, this is for our well-being and, you can't have any. No, like, we're doing that for everybody. So it's a really, when that's kind of playing out in a media discourse, it really makes my head spin, because I think, wait a second, like, this is like, you're hurting yourself. So I think that for me goes back to Nicole's comment earlier about this disassociating from our being connected beings in this web of life really is so hurtful to ourselves. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. Those laws of care and responsibility and reciprocity, I was taught that power means responsibility. And that's a very different definition from a Western lens, power, and who has the power. And so I see that even clashing up, how we even understand how power shows up for us. So thank you for sharing the basket and copper pot work that you're doing, the unlearning that's needed to help with, that humility to come back into relations with the land and the environment, to relearn who we are as as people, as Dene, our word for person is Dene. And so people, person of the land, Yankadni means person of the land. That's how it gets translated. And so we're all people of the land. And so helping come back into good relations of all ages, and the power and the decision making, the responsibility to take care of the land, but also for generations to come. It's not just about today. It's good decisions that will carry us forward. So there is healthy water. So there is a sense of well-being in the collective wherever we live. And so those are some of the learning or unlearning, I guess, we're trying to promote. So thank you for that. We just have a few moments for questions, if there's any questions or comments that people would like to ask. I think the hand function will work in the on the call here. And you're all really tiny squares, so I might miss the hands that come up. If Val or Cheryl could help me. Water sources. I have some comments from Dr. Connie Alsop. Thank you for sharing the importance of water. Yes, water is life is often our understanding. So,
we have Jasmine
okay.
for a question.
Okay, and then Yarrow. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation and sharing today. So thank you very much. And I just wanted to say that a word that's been coming in my mind throughout this conversation is the concept of alienation. And, maybe the difference between that and being isolated. And I think that, in the Western kind of capitalist colonial culture, that really so many of those systems seek to alienate us in various ways, from the land, from each other, from ourselves, from our work and our labor and what we create. And just like maybe some ideas about, what the role and impact of this alienation is, and then potentially if there's any ideas on how, this can be addressed and how we can take steps towards reconnecting with ourselves, with the land, and with our work.
Thank you for that question or comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Jasmine. I can jump in first maybe. And I think that antidote for the alienation is connection. Like, I think, oh, my kids would cringe so hard right now, because I'm going to actually refer to a teaching from a white clinical psychologist in New York City. Like, who would have thought? But these teachings come from different places. Dr. Becky Kennedy, who has a parenting community of support. And it's interesting. I find so many of her teachings from there directly applicable to the work that I do in our office around trying to advance true reconciliation. And when she is asked, like, what is the one strategy that is the most important? She says, without skipping a beat, she's like, it's repair. Like, so we are all going to make mistakes in this endeavor. We're all going to, find that there are pitfalls because of like just the absolute. This is the interesting part too, is that I think settler colonialism seems very wants us to believe it's very sturdy and strong and robust. It's actually terribly flimsy, which is why it relies on these tools to kind of keep people in these false ideas, and create these paths that make it seem more comfortable to be alone on your phone in your room and typing, troll-like comments. So anyway, Dr. Becky says repair is the ultimate strategy, and step one of repair is pursuing connection. So I think that is the antidote to alienation, but pursuing connection, and this is where I think beyond just the human connection, but that ceremony connection of just like being outside or even looking outside. Nicole bringing the cardinals in with us today, like that for me is the like just the little medicine. I'm saying little, but it's actually profound and significant that we can access all the time. So thank you for the question, because I think you're 100% right. And yeah, I would pursue connection. I'll pass it to Nicole if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think you did a great job covering that. Maybe I'll just add that what's interesting is the WHO has had a commission on social connection for the last 3 years, identifying a complete epidemic of loneliness across the world, and pervasive due to a number of complexities. And I was able to be on one of their report launches last March, thinking about that from our community perspective, and it's such a huge issue that is becoming more and more prevalent. So, the points that Danièle made are very well pointed to this issue, and emphasizing, I think, one elder told me a long time ago from the Daicho region of NWT, because I was, getting increasingly concerned when I was much younger about, knowledge being lost, and kind of like that Aunt Biddy situation. It was like, Nicole, the knowledge is never going to get lost. You just got to go out in the land and it'll come back. And remembering that connectivity is not just people to people. And, from where I come from, it's fairly isolated area. Traditionally, my family groups, were off on the tundra hunting on their own for months at a time and come back to small groups. So we didn't have these big, large ceremonies and things like they do down south. We were relatively isolated, but our relationships and our connectivities were always to the land and components. So remembering that when we are lonely, that we have a whole landscape of relatives just looking outside the window if we choose to relate with them.
Yes, thank you for that. The land has a memory. It's where our ancestors are, our language, our teachings, our songs. We can see the stars, which have special meaning, constellations, the stories. And I read a beautiful report about storytelling. And when we read the stories, we get dopamine hits when we hear our stories in our language. And those are the things we need in our body, the endorphin and dopamine, to help us feel better and know that we're connected to something larger than us. And storytelling, much like you're sharing today, is good medicine. We say that's medicine. It restores us. It helps us feel good. We smile. We know that we're not alone. And so, but that's a remembering and a teaching, hey, to reach out and connect into story or place or having tea with an elder on the land. Those are important. Or just stopping and watching the birds fly by. And my late father used to love springtime because he loved the way the guys were doing the dancings for the women, trying to get hooked up for mating. And he just loved this time of the year because the birds were in full swing. And so, but if we're so busy, we don't get to see or hear or notice those things. And so the slowing down, I've talked about this many times, the slowing down and noticing the land, what it provides, where you are, where you live, not only knowing where the water comes from and where it goes, but what else do you notice? What kind of trees are there? The place we live in needs care. And so what are you doing to care for that place where you live in as a guest or in your own homeland? And to me, that's kind of the hands-on, the action piece. And it could be just little things. It doesn't need, a huge committee or a coalition. So thank you. All right, so we got 5 minutes left. Is there any final comments? Oh no, there was one other speaker.
Yeah. Maddie, and then it's Gerald, I think, that has the hands up.
Okay, quickly
Hi
go through.
everyone. My name is Mati Cervantes from UVic. I'm a doctoral candidate working with planetary health. I'm from Mexico. And I just want to say I'm very happy to be here, to be listening to all of you. And Nicole, I'm just wondering if you can maybe answer to a question around how spiritual wisdom can help us to address the planetary health crisis. And just to make a little bit of context quickly, because I know we're wrapping up, in this dimension of well-being, like spiritual well-being, it's a big part of it. And I think we all have been kind of talking about it, talking maybe about rituals, ceremonies, relationships, but I'm very interested in this spiritual relationship from my spirit to the spirit of water, spirit of the earth. So how can a spiritual wisdom can give us the strength to have bold actions towards planetary health? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's an important one, and I keep thinking there's an elder up in Hlutzelke. Whenever I have this conversation or I've done a presentation back home, he always reminds us that if we're not foundationing the spiritual aspect of these in the conversations, that we're missing, the whole piece, that the creator and the spirit element needs to be the foundation. Otherwise, we'll lose our root and get too stuck in the other realms, the mental, emotional, and physical realms. So I think about him when you were asking that question, and I can see his face, even how he was describing it with that in strong intention of the importance of keeping that. And there's some great work happening with Indigenous scholars, I think, in this area. I think of Yuri Seldowin, who's actually from the Mayan community in Mexico, and she was at Berkeley for a number of years doing a postdoc, was with the UN system on Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And she has about 5 years of work of bringing in this contemplative spiritual aspect to planetary health. And she's written a book and a number of articles on that. So you may find her work interesting, just given the geographic proximity to where she is, and the contemplative practices bridging these spiritual connectivity pieces with even modern meditation and experiential experience is really one of the first times I've seen an Indigenous person from around the globe kind of marrying and bridging and weaving and braiding all of these aspects together with the purposes of trying to bring peace, harmony, and spiritual connection to all people, not just Indigenous peoples, but to all, to help facilitate this reclamation process, this repatriation process. And would encourage you to look to her work. It's Yuri Seldowin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Gracias.
Great. Okay, and over to Yarrow. Sorry if I missed.
Dzień dobry, dziękuję. Hello and thank you. My name is Yarrow Malinowski. I'm a Polish immigrant and settler here in Victoria, here on the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Lekwungen people. Real honor to be here today and to learn from all of you. I work with incredible youth in Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories, and we're helping the youth there share their stories about what is happening in that community. Lots of things, amazing, beautiful community. But as the water is rising, the pressures for the community to relocate, to move, is causing a lot of mental health issues in the community. And often I always remember the voice of young Ariel Lute, who says that, why us up here? Why do we have to scream and yell to help the people of the South understand that everything they're doing is affecting us so much? And so as we continue our work there, I ask for some guidance of hope. That's it, I guess, just if you have any suggestions.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Yarrow, and appreciate it's not easy working in these circumstances. And, as noted at the beginning about the wildfires and the situations and all the impacts that are happening within our communities on intersecting crises that are going on, it's quite frustrating. And especially for Tuktoyaktuk, who, if you look at an image from their community and the way that the community is, the risk of sea level rise as well as coastal erosion is incredibly high for this community, with conversations mirroring some of the small island states and the sea level rise issues, as well as the Alaskan coastlines. So can't minimize the future that they risk, given these kinds of narratives and the youth's voice. I think of the words of Francois Paulette, who's a Denisouflanet elder, and he stood up, at the World Religion Parliament and basically said, "Your way of life is killing my way of life." And it reminded me of him making that statement at that forum to be able to bring voice to these issues and the real consequence of people happening. But one thing that gives me hope, and there's a new commission that's coming out, hopefully in the next few months, which is a Justice Commission around sea level rise, and it's connected to the Pacific Islands. And I think Margot's on the call as well, but we had went down to Fiji last year, about a year ago today. And one thing I realized very clearly was that the snow and ice up in my home region and the Arctic and those areas are, facilitating some of the sea level rise and some of the issues. So, despite not being part of the problem and impacting these issues, we were connected to these sites through water, through our ice and snow melting and these sea level rise issues happening in these small island states where they're under very significant risk, particularly in some islands, of being underwater by the end of the century. And having these conversations, to connect us as people. And I keep hearing the prophecies around the world from different elders say, now is the time that we got to come together. Now is that time for that connection for these issues. And the more that we can connect people in Tuktoyaktuk, to Indigenous communities in Fiji, to our relatives in Ojiek in Kenya, to our Sami relatives, facilitating these connection points, I think, is an opportunity that we can leverage more. And I would encourage, utilizing these kinds of networks that are forming to bring in the central lines, if we could say, that are already being established with these communities, so that they're not feeling so alone and so isolated in these issues, but can bridge and partner with our other community sites around the world that are facing these issues to bring a more powerful voice, but also be able to grieve in the realities that are happening. And I think that's the PowerPoints that we have right now, is like dropping pebbles into the water and having the ripples starting to just integrate and interconnect with each other. And would really love to chat further if it's of interest in how to maybe connect those communities to some of the other work going on.
Wonderful. Thank you for the question and comment and the response from Nicole's perspective, and the importance of connection globally, internationally. And that coming together is good medicine, and sharing and listening, that another collective, and how that helps us all. Yeah, so thank you for that. I know Nicole has to leave a couple minutes early. And so I just want to thank her from my heart for her kind words and her perspective and teachings to help us understand, well-being, relationality, reciprocity, our laws, to move away from a human-centric way, to come back into relations with the land, the waters, spirit, and how good that is for all of us. So thank you, Nicole. Yeah, thank you so much, Tabi Masai. It's so good to see you and have you here with us. Yeah.
Masicho.
Right. Yeah. And Danièle, we'll just finish up if you want to have a final word or comment.
Oh, sure. I was just going to share a definition of hope that I heard from my colleague Harmony Johnson, who's from Tla'amin Nation. And she once told me that hope has 3 elements: that you believe that things can be better, that there's a path to that better state, and you're on the path. So those 3 elements really help me when I'm thinking about how do we stay hopeful. And I think it is through that connection piece as well. And so I threw a couple of links in the chat, but one of the ones I just put in that related to Nicole's comments as well is from a Samoan journalist who does a lot of climate journalism, Lai Povia. Povia, I'm certainly mispronouncing her beautiful name, but she did a really fascinating piece where Australia created the first climate refugee visas for people from her territories. And she went and interviewed elders about what they thought about it. And the elders said, there's no way, like unanimously, we're like, I will never leave these islands. I will die here. And my grandkids should absolutely go. And it was heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. And I think this really speaks to the testament of our strength and resilience as Indigenous peoples. We are still here. We'll do what it takes to carry on and, do what we need to do. And I love this idea of connection so that we can together see that there is absolutely a better way. And we lived it. All of us lived at a time when there was no homelessness. Our ancestors did, every single one of us. This is such a, wild, compressed timeline that we've gotten so out of balance. So that helps me that it is more about a remembering. Often we're talking about new solutions. No, what we need is ancient wisdom to just take us back to that place of balance. And the very last thing I was going to say, your name is fantastic. I love that you've got the phonetic yarrow. That was the one plant that I saw in every single place that we traveled. We went from my homelands to Wales and Ireland, to Namibia, to Sri Lanka, to the Gold Coast. We went to Aotearoa. I mentioned Peru, Navajo territory, and Saskatchewan, a big finish in Saskatchewan in February. The plant medicine people were like, what are you doing here? It's February. I was like, whoops. But this just makes me think the Creator doesn't make mistakes. So there must be something about your work that is about this connecting and helping these connections to flourish, to build that hope. Masicho. Back to you, Sandra.
Okay, thank you. So much wisdom in the room and learning and maybe a little bit of unlearning, this idea of well-being, connection to land, helping to move away from this human-centered way, coming back and taking care of spirit, recognizing gifts from the land, the water, the plants, more than human beings, coming back and recognizing the natural laws that we live in. What do we do with our power? Recognizing the wisdom, the remembering, and the connection to one another to help us grow and take care of each other and the land in a good way. And so, yeah, thank you so much for this beautiful webinar this morning. Thank you to PHABC and to Danièle, Nicole, and Val. Yes, and big love to Shannon and her travels. And so thank you so much for joining us and joining in today, this fine morning. Tabi Masai.
Masicho, Sandra. It was so nice to visit with you. Thanks, Shannon, and everybody for getting us together. Have an excellent rest of your day.
And you too.
God bless everybody. I just was blown away by the divine feminine wisdom shared today. It's deeply hopeful, and we're so grateful. We're so grateful. Thank you, Val. Thank you for getting us organized and sorted and serving on our committee and continuing to show up in all the good ways. All the people that joined us, we're blessed by your commitments to this work and to deep reconciliation.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.